I wanted to share some thoughts arising out of our life group, our Bible study that we had last night. Here's the context. It's the start of term, and the lead elder at our church, Chris, preached on Sunday, using the opportunity just to give some big picture vision kind of stuff. And we try to align our life groups with the Sunday morning teaching. So for most of this term, we're going to be working through the book of Mark, through Mark's Gospel, and picking up and looking at bits that have been highlighted on Sunday and going into a bit more detail. That's what we'll be doing in the life group. But this Sunday was this one-off sermon, and I was talking to Chris about life group before Wednesday, and we'd not been in our usual church on Sunday. We'd been away for the weekend for my sister's and brother-in-law's silver wedding anniversary, and so Chris said, well, what we did was we looked at the church as a kingdom of priests, as citizens of heaven, that wonderful theme that we find in the New Testament, and as a house of prayer. So I thought that for our life group, the best thing to do this week would be to pick up on the theme. And so I did a quick Google search to find from Bible Hub that the phrase, my house is a house of prayer, to remind myself of where that came from. And of course, it's from Isaiah 56. So we did the Bible study. Isaiah 56, verse 1 to 8. So let me read that for you. I'm going to read from the New Living Translation. This is what the Lord says. Be just and fair to all. Do what is right and good. For I am coming soon to rescue you and to display my righteousness among you. Blessed are all those who are careful to do this. Blessed are those who honour my Sabbath days of rest and keep themselves from doing wrong. And don't let foreigners who commit themselves to the Lord say, the Lord will never let me be part of his people. And don't let the eunuchs say, I'm a dried up tree with no children and no future. For this is what the Lord says, I will bless those eunuchs who keep my Sabbath day holy and who choose to do what pleases me and commit their lives to me. I will give them within the walls of my house a memorial and a name far greater than sons and daughters could give. For the name I give them is an everlasting one. It will never disappear. I will also bless the foreigners who commit themselves to the Lord, who serve him and love his name, who worship him and do not desecrate the Sabbath day of rest, and who hold fast to my covenant. I will bring them to my holy mountain of Jerusalem and will fill them with joy in my house of prayer. I will accept their burnt offerings and sacrifices because my temple will be called a house of prayer for all nations. For the sovereign Lord, who brings back the outcasts of Israel, says, I will bring others too, besides my people Israel. Come, wild animals of the field, come, wild animals of the forest, come and devour my people, for the leaders of my people, the Lord's watchmen, his shepherds, are blind and ignorant. They are like silent watchdogs that give no warning when danger comes. They love to lie around, sleeping and dreaming. Like greedy dogs, they are never satisfied. They are ignorant shepherds, all following their own path and intent on personal gain. Come, they say, Let's get some wine and have a party. Let's all get drunk. Then tomorrow we'll do it again and have an even bigger party. Good people pass away. The godly often die before their time, but no one seems to care or wonder why. No one seems to understand that God is protecting them from the evil to come. For those who follow godly paths will rest in peace when they die. So much packed in there, and we're going to be really focusing on the first 8 verses today. But there's things I'm going to be picking up on over the next few weeks, because what we're going to be doing in the podcast, and in fact, we're starting with a series of articles next week, is thinking about how we plant safer churches. One of my concerns is to see churches planted in the West Midlands into our urban context. I want to see more churches planted, but not just church planting for the sake of it. We want those churches to be healthy, to be growing, to be fruitful, to be doing the job of making disciples of Jesus Christ and gathering people to worship. And one aspect of that is that question of churches being safe. So look out for those podcasts to come. And this really starts to highlight that vision. So, what is going on? Anybody who's joined me for a Bible study will know that I like to ask 2 big questions. What is going on in a passage, and what has that got to do with us? And to understand what it's got to do with us, we need to apply Old Testament passages through Jesus Christ, through the Gospel, through the New Testament, to life today, to avoid legalism. So what is going on here? Well, Isaiah was prophesying around about 700 years before Jesus, in the 8th century. He is a priest in the temple in Jerusalem. So in Isaiah chapter 6, he has that famous vision where he says, I saw the Lord high and lifted up, and his train, his robes, his glory filled the temple. And Isaiah says that his immediate response was to cry, woe is me, I'm undone, my mouth and my lips are unclean, I'm not worthy to appear before the living God. This is not just an angel, Yahweh himself has appeared. And Isaiah fears for his life. God speaks to him, God acts, God sends an angel from the altar bringing a burning coal to cleanse his lips. He asks, who can I send? And Isaiah responds and says, I'm ready to speak for you. Here I am. Send me. And then Yahweh makes it clear that the message, the task, the mission, the burden that he is placing on Isaiah is no easy one. That the people consumed with idolatry will be like their idols, idols that are deaf and dumb and motionless. And so they will be unable to understand. They will hear but not listen. They will look but not see. And a message of judgment is coming that the people will harden their hearts to. And so the bulk of the first part of Isaiah brings this warning of judgment. Around about the 8th century, the Assyrians are maneuvering against the northern kingdom, against Israel in the north. Isaiah is clear that judgment will come upon them. But the southern kingdom in Judah shouldn't think that they've got off. The attack will come to their door. They will resist the Assyrians, but eventually they will be taken into captivity into the north, into exile in Babylon, and then to Persia as well. Judgment is coming. Winter is coming. But Isaiah's prophecy looks, and if winter is coming, so too is summer. Summer is coming. And so the second half of the prophecy looks ahead and says a day is coming when God will restore the fortunes of his people. He will bring them out of exile. Isaiah 40 talks about God speaking comfort to Jerusalem. Her sin is paid for. And then Isaiah 43, when it describes passing through fire and water and flood and not being harmed, it is echoing back to how the people of Israel were brought out of Egypt through the Red Sea on dry ground and then through the Jordan River, the waters parting for them safely. Unlike the Egyptian army, they are not drowned and destroyed. They pass through a desert, a fiery wilderness, and all kinds of dangers. And in the same way, the people will be brought out of exile in Babylon and Persia and return, and they will be brought safely home, just like their ancestors were brought through the fire and the flood, so too will they. And the prophecy then focuses on one person. Some interpreters thought that this servant represented Israel herself. Of course, we know from the Gospels that it was pointing to Jesus, the one who is the servant, who acts for God, who speaks for God, who loves and cares for the people. And this servant is crushed. Pierced, whipped, brutally killed, but not for anything wrong that they have done. He was crushed for our iniquities. The judgment is laid on him. He pays the penalty for our sin. And so that prophecy says that the servant, although facing that untimely demise, will not be without children, will not be without descendants. And in fact, their life will be long because God, of course, raised Jesus from the dead. And through his death and resurrection brings many sons to glory. So the prophecy continues. In fact, the prophecy talks about this restoration that is so amazing, so detailed, and has this nowness to it. Even naming the emperor who would make it happen. That's plenty to get into in terms of how that happened and how the text might have worked. But some people were so incredulous at the detail of prophecy here that they said, this can't be prophecy. And so for a lot of the 19th and 20th century, there was this heavy belief pushed strongly by liberal theologians that the book of Isaiah must have been written by at least two, possibly three people over a period of time. Well, I don't think there's any reason to believe that, because I believe in the power of prophecy, and I believe that Isaiah was able to look ahead, not just a couple of hundred years to the restoration of Judah, but 700 years to the ultimate fulfillment. We shouldn't be afraid of prophecy and God's ability to know and to see the future that he has foreordained. And that's the context here. And that's why you've still got ongoing judgment here. So as I will talk about the woe, the judgment that is upon the watchmen, the shepherds of his day, the leaders of Israel, the priests and their kings as well, their failure to see that danger is coming, their belief that they're going to continue in prosperity when danger is coming, their ignorance, verse 11, their cruelty, their selfishness, that they are getting rich and fat, that they are wolves, they are false shepherds, that they are abusing their position and abusing the people for their own gratification. But there's also a different vision. You see, the promise of Isaiah, just as it's there in Ezekiel as well, was that God would gather his people back from where they've been dispersed to. He would gather them back into the land, that Jerusalem would be restored, that the temple would be rebuilt, and that would become a place of prayer. Verse 7, there in verse 7, a house of prayer, and the nations, we see this through the prophets, would be drawn, the people from all nations would be drawn to this place of prayer, to know about and to know Yahweh for themselves. The sovereign Lord who brings back the outcasts of Israel says, I will bring others too beside my people. If I can restore this nation, I can bring people who are not my people, who are outside of the covenant in. And that's the theme. So Isaiah says that the leaders should be just and fair to all and do what is right and good. And even those that are suffering persecution can themselves act rightly and justly. Why? Because I'm coming soon to rescue you and to display my righteousness. Verse 1, that God is going to show that he is right and just and holy and faithful and glorious and good. And he says that if you are just and fair, if you act rightly and fairly, then you are blessed, you are happy. Those people that are blessed, those who honour my Sabbath days, those who keep the law. Notice the purpose of the law, Jesus said, was made for man, not man for the law, and so it brings rest. Those that seek to be blameless. That would seem obvious. Law keepers, covenant members, those that are faithful to God, they will be rescued. That's how that would have been understood, that they would be saved, that the righteous would be vindicated and liberated. But Yahweh goes on and says, don't let foreigners who commit themselves to the Lord say, the Lord will never let me be part of his people. And don't let the eunuchs say, I'm a dried up tree with no children and no future. And there's a lot about eunuchs here, isn't it? I think that was my wife's first reaction after we read that. She said, I wasn't expecting so many eunuch references here. I wasn't either, but here we have it. Eunuchs and foreigners. Why these two groups? Well, foreigners, those that are not physical descendants of Abraham. They're not to say, I can never be part of this, I can't belong, I'm excluded because of my genetics, because of my background, because of my ethnicity, because of my race. They're a warning to anyone who believes that God looks on them favourably because of their ancestry, because they consider themselves to be part of a specific chosen and special nation, whether that is Israel as here or today, Britain or America, because of your ancestry, because your parents are believers. We're not automatically included because our parents and grandparents believed, and nor are we excluded because we don't have what is perceived to be the right colour of skin, the right genetics, the right ethnicity. Don't let foreigners, don't let the Gentiles who commit themselves to the Lord say, I can't be part of his people. And eunuchs were people that had their genitalia removed, men. Often this would have happened as boys, and it was so that they could serve politically, to serve kings and emperors without them being a threat, because they're not going to have descendants, so they have no reason to rival the emperor or the king for his throne. So they are mutilated. Political gain. So what we see here are excluded and damaged and despised people. Eunuchs, because they were mutilated, would not have been able to go into the temple. They were excluded. But Isaiah is saying they are no longer excluded. Gentiles could only go in the new temple, the second temple, Herod's temple. They could only go into an outer courtyard. The temple had these concentric rings of walls. So right at the heart of it was the Holy of Holies, where the high priest could go only once a year. Then the main temple building, where the priest could offer incense, where Isaiah would have been working in the original temple. And then that temple in Jesus' day would have then had a courtyard where the men could gather to praise and to worship and to wait for their sacrifices to be offered. Outside of that, a courtyard where women could go. There was a gender barrier in place. And then outside of that, a courtyard where the Gentiles could go to kind of look in from the outside, but no further in. They were banned from going further on pain of death. And in fact, you will remember that that is what causes the riot in Acts 21 and leads to trouble for Paul and his arrest, because the rumour goes around that he's brought a Gentile, someone who's uncircumcised, into the temple where they had no business to be. So Yahweh singles out the despised, the excluded, the defiled, the mutilated, the damaged. And the eunuch is there saying, I'm damaged goods, damaged beyond repair. There is no hope for me. The hope, the satisfaction, the purpose, the meaning that you would have had in those days, and still often it seems today do, in terms of the ability to produce children and grandchildren, descendants, to carry on your family name, something so important as a theme. They believe it's lost to them. I'm colourful language here for how sometimes the castration happens. I'm a dried up tree with no children and no future. I'm a dried up tree. It looks hopeless and bleak for them, rejected, despairing, damaged. But Yahweh, through the prophet Isaiah, says, no, don't give up hope. Don't say this. I will bless you. I will bless. And then he says, so it's not just they're blessed because they're eunuchs, but he says 5 things here about these people that will be blessed. Who is going to be blessed? Well, in verse 4, he says, I will bless the eunuchs who keep my Sabbath days, who choose to do what pleases me and commit their lives to me. And he says, I will give them within the walls of my house a memorial for my name. They will be allowed in. They will be remembered and memorialized, and it will be a name, an honour far greater than sons and daughters can give, something even better than descendants, because they are going to have an everlasting name that will never disappear. Family generations do come to an end. Lineages come to an end, but this one won't. And for the foreigners, so this is where I meant to talk about the 5 things. 5 things about them. They're going to be blessed. I will bless those who commit themselves to the Lord, or bind themselves, join themselves with him, who serve him, and who love his name. worship him and do not desecrate the Sabbath day of rest, so keep and honour the Sabbath, and who hold fast to my covenant. So these eunuchs and foreigners are people who, although not physical descendants of Abraham, have bought into the covenant, who love God, who love his ways, who want to do what is right and pleasing, and join themselves to God. And God-fearers, God-worshippers. And Isaiah reports Yahweh's words. The Lord says, I will bring them to my mountain of Jerusalem and will fill them with joy in my house of prayer. I will accept their sacrifices. Why? Because my temple will be called a house of prayer for all nations. And there's that point. I can gather in the exiles, so I can gather in those that were discarded, disgraced, despised, damaged, outsiders, outcasts, beyond hope. There is a overflowing depth of mercy and grace that reaches far wider than the people could ask or imagine. That is what Isaiah is prophesying. As I said, we want to think about what that's got to do with us. And to apply it to us, we've got to first of all apply it to Christ and to see what he does with this. How the New Testament takes it on. Fascinating, isn't it? Because my temple will be called a house of prayer for all nations. I wonder if you recognise that phrase. We sat and scratched our heads and tried to remember in our Bible study the other night, and we remembered that this was something that Jesus had said. And he'd said it in the temple, he quoted it. It is said, my temple, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you've turned it into a den of thieves and robbers. Jesus says that as he clears the money changers and the traders from the temples. He overturns the temples and whips them away as he purges the temple. I mean, the context of the verse he quotes here gives us a sense of why he is passionately zealous and angry for God's house, that the purpose of the temple was to draw all peoples into a place of worship, into God's presence, to enable them in that place where they are given a name far greater than sons and daughters could give, a new name. And Jesus, God the Son, the second person of the Trinity, Yahweh himself, fully God and fully man, Emmanuel, God with us, shows up at the temple, at his house, at his father's house, and he finds there the obstacles and barriers that have been placed, that to get through there is this trading, this injustice, this money making, that there are walls that are impassable, that the courtyard where the trading is happening, where all the noise is happening, is the very place where the Gentiles were coming to pray. So there are obstacles to stop them getting further in, and even where they are allowed, they are disrupted from their prayers. And it reflected the whole attitude, these false, ignorant and blind, wicked, greedy shepherds that in Jesus' day were abusing widows, the vulnerable, the outcast, the stranger, the eunuch. Jesus, not of the temple, become this den of thieves. So he purges it, he judges it, he purifies it. A little fascinating thing, elsewhere, I think it might be Mark 10 or Matthew 19 or somewhere like that, Jesus talks about eunuchs. He talks about those that have been born eunuchs, those that have been forced to be eunuchs, those that have become eunuchs for the sake of the Lord out of their own choice, and he offers hope to them. But here's the crucial thing: if we are applying this through Christ and first to him, then it's important to remember that Jesus makes it clear that all of the prophecies about the temple and the description of the temple are first and foremost about him. He makes himself the temple, the place where it is possible to meet God and to find peace with him. Jesus is both the sacrifice that is offered and the place where the sacrifice is offered. Jesus is the one where heaven meets earth. He is the temple that will be destroyed, cast down, but raised up in 3 days. He speaks about his own body. So Jesus is himself the one in whom we find a name far greater than sons and daughters can give. He is the one that offers peace and hope and reconciliation. God's love to exiles and strangers, to those that are defiled and damaged. And of course, we know that that means that the righteousness that we have, that we plead, the covenant membership that we depend upon, the obedience is not our own, but Jesus is the one who fulfills the law, the one who displays that righteousness, who properly honours the Sabbath, who does what is right, who is just and fair. His obedience on our behalf, so that his death and resurrection are also on our behalf. He takes, as Isaiah 53 points, he takes the penalty of sin on us, on himself, but gives us his righteousness so that we are justified. That it is righteousness is credited to us by faith. What does that mean for us? Sorry. Before I just want to say before we go on, fascinating, isn't it? Then how this would have been heard and understood then in the immediate aftermath for the early church. The day of Pentecost, people from the nations have come to Jerusalem and they get to hear God's praise in their own language. And then there's a man, and he's heading back from the festival. He's from Ethiopia, a foreigner. He's a eunuch. Both of those things mentioned here. And he's reading from Isaiah as he's in his chariot heading home. He's reading Isaiah 53, but he would have had the whole scroll here, and the chapters and the headings and the verses wouldn't have been put in yet. So I would suggest that he probably had the scroll with this section in and would have been reading all of it. But of course, when Philip is taken there to speak with him, he takes him through the specific bit in Isaiah 53, because that's how we make sense of all of this. To think that here's this guy, this eunuch, and he is reading, "Don't let the eunuch say I'm a dried up tree." This foreigner, this Ethiopian, and he's reading, "Don't let foreigners who commit themselves to the Lord say, the Lord will never let me be part of his people." It's almost as though somebody, in sort of modern parlance, has carefully selected an appropriate gospel tract to give to this guy who's visited the festival. Take this home and read it. You might find it helpful. And we're not going to get into evangelism methods right now, but It's amazing, isn't it? This man, this foreigner and eunuch, who finds that because Jesus was pierced for his transgressions, the promise to foreigners and eunuchs of blessing and a name far greater than sons and daughters could give comes true. What about us today? What has this got to do with you and me and the churches that we are part of? Simply this: it should renew our passion and our zeal. Jesus was passionate for the temple, and of course, that passion meant a passion for God's house. For the temple speaks of Christ himself, a passion for him and his sacrifice for the gospel. If we are his body, then we too, then in the New Testament, are described as the temple, a house built on Christ, the foundation and cornerstone. So for us, it should be a passion and zeal for Christ and his church. Our desire should be that the church, globally, historically, and the church, our local churches, as they preach the gospel and point to Christ, is a place where the outsider, the stranger, the damaged, the hurt, the defiled, the mutilated find hope and peace. Eunuchs were mutilated for political gain, and today we see so many people that have been abused, mutilated, damaged, often for political and ideological gain as well as for selfish gain. We see people that have been abused and hurt and harmed. And we see people that would feel that their life is fruitless and hopeless. Sometimes literally that because of health or marital status or whatever, that it's not going to be possible for me to have a family or children. So many people that are lonely. In our society and even already within our churches, we will meet people who just feel that they are damaged goods, without hope, far off, both because of what they have done to themselves, what they've done to others, and what has been done to them. If we and our churches are to be a house of prayer, then we need God to give us the patience, not just to say people are welcome, but to truly welcome them, to see them restored, just left as they are. This is not just secular tolerance and inclusivity. This is about seeing people welcomed, regardless of their state and situation, but also seeing them renewed and changed and become new creations, given hope in him. To encourage you, first of all, if those words resonate with you, that if you identify with the foreigner and the eunuch in this passage, to find that in Christ there is blessing, there is a new name, there is hope, there is love, there is reconciliation, forgiveness possible with God. The sacrifice is accepted. Put your trust in Jesus. And I want to challenge us, whether we are members of churches, leaders of churches, church planters, church pastors, youth workers, children's workers, worship leaders, This is through our work and our friendship and our neighbours, to seek to put this into practice, that those that the world would see as damaged goods, outcast beyond the pale, those that sadly too often we in the church have treated in the same way, that we would truly seek to love and to welcome and to offer this message of hope. God in Jesus Christ has come to rescue them, that he gives them within the walls of his house a name, a memorial and a name far greater than sons and daughters could give, an everlasting one that will never disappear.